Very happy to be here. Excited about the conversation today. In terms of my background, it usually starts with my graduate education, which got me into this world of talent. So I have a master's in industrial organizational psychology. What does all that mean? Well, in undergrad, my least favorite course was test and measurements. Didn't want to get anywhere near that. And through graduate school and my management consulting career, I made it into a career. So you never know which job or focus you're going to end up in based on what you truly find is your passion and your talent. So for about the past 20 years, that's really what I've focused on. Using the people data we get from talent assessments, whether it be surveys, testing, questionnaires, using that to really help organizations harness some insights and drive action. Really drive that organizational change, leadership behavior change, high-performing teams, whatever the problem to solve may require. On my side, it starts with a lot of data and a lot of best practice consulting and advisement. And I've really enjoyed that work. I've done it across a number of areas. Certainly, candidate selection has been a big focus, whether it's personality assessment or behavioral interview programs or even work simulation role plays. Done a lot of interesting things to help organizations gauge whether or not individuals are a good fit for the job they're looking to fill. But from there, it's gone beyond that. A lot of work in leadership development, training, a lot of workshops, certainly helping leaders better guide and meet the needs of their teams, and also even employee engagement, understanding what really connects an individual to the mission of an organization and really keeps them productive and retained as a member of that workforce. So it started off very much on the selection and research side. I grew into a management consultant, being more in front of leadership teams, and have gotten deeper into the overall employee life cycle with training and engagement over the years. So it's a bit more soup to nuts as my career has progressed, and I just love it. People spend most of their waking lives at work, so if I can do something to make that time better for them, I feel like I'm doing something important.
Well, your alignment and passion definitely show in your work, so I appreciate that. What brings us together today is an interesting conversation I had with Scott Witcher, who's Scott's another Predictive Index employee. He actually works with a lot of the partners and helps coach them. And something that's very front of mind these days is, hiring and looking for candidates, especially when we look at where we're at in the world today with, 9.2 million open jobs in the market. Depending which industry you're looking at, there's various levels of unemployment still. A lot of the hiring businesses are saying that they're having a hard time bringing people in the door. And so Scott reached out to me and said, hey, you want to check out this article from Harvard Business Review, written by Debbie Ferguson and Frederick Lee, both from Gusto, which is a company out in Mountain View, California. And what was really interesting was reading through this article, predominantly about looking at different backgrounds and different unconventional hiring methods. And I think that fits well with your background. And he said, hey, you got to talk to Adam about this. This is right up his alley. So I wanted to get your thoughts relative to the article. And we talked before a little bit about this. I really think you've got some unique insights to offer relative to that. So maybe you want to start commenting about what you call the Great Resignation.
Yeah, absolutely. So this has been coming for a while, and now it's kind of a tsunami. We had a lot of the burnout symptoms during the pandemic. Individuals working out of a place of fear, post reduction in force, certainly having their role clarity shaken as their job changed, if they were a survivor, and taking on whatever they could to maintain that survivorship, and then becoming quite exhausted. Another burnout driver through additional hours, picking up more work in kind of a desperate moment that we all kind of lived through. So from there, I think that desperation and burnout has become a lack of engagement due to a lack of role clarity. And certainly we have this situation coming where we're already seeing it. It's not even a situation that's coming. This Great Resignation is happening where individuals are leaving organizations in mass, in large droves. So it's, I've seen some thought leadership around how to avoid it. I think we're beyond that. I think it's here, it's happening, it's starting to crest. So, Jared, I really like your perspective on this discussion that we talked about prior in terms of how do we deal with it? It's here. So,
Exactly.
how do we retain who we can retain? But how do we fill those roles potentially via unconventional means? Because those roles are opening, people are leaving, and we need to not just solve the problem of retention, but solve the problem of hiring.
Yes.
And the other point of the Great Resignation, I think, is around how do we then reach out to those candidates and identify those new candidates in this world of remote work, where we've probably fast forwarded companies' openness and willingness to do remote work by about a decade. We were going to get here anyway, but this showed that it does work. So if you look at job postings right now, I mean, remote is part of the headline across many of them. So now you're not fighting regionally for talent, you're fighting nationally for talent. So it's even harder to fill some of these roles for different reasons and different job levels. So I like to look at the Great Resignation as something that we are in the middle of, and we need to look at it, as you've said, from a candidate identification and selection perspective, not just from a retention and turnover avoidance perspective. That's part of it, but they're hand in hand. It is here, and we need to hit it head on.
I think you're spot on. It is here. We got to deal with it. We got to take action. A couple of key points I want to go back to, because you really hit on some really great stuff. And to dig a little deeper, role clarity, right? We see it all the time in the businesses we consult with, where because they had to cut back a little bit and they had to make ends meet, people got leveraged into different jobs. Something they didn't intend to work in when they originally came in the business. So this is a great opportunity, I think, an actionable item, right, for business owners to step back and say, hey, who did we leverage? Who's succeeding in those jobs? Who's not succeeding in those jobs? Maybe because they're not aligned with it 100%, or maybe they don't love it. And where can we kind of reconfigure things a little bit to deal with the existing employees? Because the other thing you hit on briefly, and I really want to emphasize, is the employee engagement piece, which is going to, one, stop the bleeding. It's going to retain your current employees in-house, because you got to stop the exodus. If you don't stop the exodus, now it just doubles, triples your hiring problem and your people problem. So relative to that employee engagement thing, any other thoughts relative to that business owners can do aside from doing a look across to see where they can get people back aligned to what they love doing?
Yeah, it's a great point. And if you look at some of the research on employee burnout, some will tell you that it's the most highly engaged employees that tend to have the most burnout, right? Which makes sense. They're most passionate about the organization's mission and their work. And if those things are shaken, they will be the ones they're not going to say, whatever, right? No, they're bought in, and you have to take care of that buy-in and that engagement. So if we have those, we assume top performers and those very highly engaged folks most burnt out, and their engagements hit hardest, I think we just have to look at the 4 forces of disengagement. So in the research, it tells us it's the person's job, their manager, their team, and the organization. Those are the 4 forces that converge on either driving engagement up or unfortunately bringing it down, which can lead to low productivity or turnover. And this turnover we're seeing certainly in the Great Resignation. And I think just all the churn and change, and I just think of playing Yahtzee, where you put the dice in a cup and you shake the dice. Like, we've shaken our people for a year and a half. And if those 4 forces are true, all of a sudden my job is different. This is not the job I was hired for. And that could be a great thing, or it could be like, this isn't what I want to do. This isn't where my talent lies. Certainly my manager may be different. Did my manager not survive the riff and I'm reporting to someone else now? That relationship is different than it was. My team is different. I think we see a lot of teams be put together from spare parts, that survived this or chose not to leave. And those teams are even partially in the office now as people return, and partially remote. So that's a new dynamic. Right. And even the organization driver of engagement. Companies had to pivot their strategy. And now if engagement is defined as my emotional commitment to the organization's goals, if the goals have changed, how has that changed with how my values align to what the company does? So it's very possible those 4 indices of engagement, then maybe were healthy pre-pandemic, and they've changed through no malice of anyone, just circumstance. And now I'm looking at those 4 things like this is not me. this is not where I want to be or what I want to do. So that's, looking at the science and research on burnout and engagement and the drivers of engagement, those four things could have gotten shaken up very, very powerfully. And again, it's not a matter of anyone twisting their mustache or doing anything evil. It's just things have changed, and that role clarity needs to be readdressed, to your point, to stop the bleeding a little bit.
Very important topic there, the 4 points of disengagement, which I know Predictive Index, incorporates into their training and does a great job with that. I got to say, for the listeners and viewers out there, I mean, when we talk employee engagement, we are automatically assuming that you are going beyond the basics of, talking to your employees and recognize your employees. I think a lot of companies just think employee engagement is recognizing birthdays and doing raffles and bingo and things like that. And those are all great things to get people's morale up and everything. Sustaining that, though, is really not done unless you're truly engaging person to person, individual to individual, and understanding their needs. So there's an automatic assumption in this conversation that people are going that next level, and they're not doing the party planning committee. They're going beyond that to engage their employees. So I really appreciate that aspect of the 4 points of disengagement. So when we talk about, the Great Resignation, role clarity, those are all actionable things that, role clarity is an actionable item that managers can do, employers can do to start dealing with some of the exodus and trying to get their people back aligned and retaining their employees, right? Beyond that, now we got to talk about supplementing the gaps. So when we talk about hiring and going back to this Harvard Business Review article, their aspect is looking at a very diverse way of hiring. So they're looking at the diversity aspect of how you get away from group think and you bring in other perspectives by hiring unlikely candidates. I know you and I talked the other day that there's this often overlooked gem that managers don't consider when trying to fill an open position is looking at your internal candidates. Maybe there's somebody right-sized in your organization that could take on that new challenge and maybe is a great fit. And then you could supplement somebody from the outside coming in doing a known job, and that person can kind of help that next person coming in adjust while they take on the new challenge. Is there any thoughts or any discussion around that?
Yeah, I think that is a really interesting approach. I'll use a phrase from a colleague: to feed 2 birds with 1 scone, as opposed to kill 2 birds with 1 stone was deemed too violent. I'm like, I like that. This concept of, again, you're losing people, you're going to lose some more, but we're not going to give up on retention. Right. So Jared, as you're saying, that lateral move or whatever that move internally is, from taking someone who really was in a great spot pre-madness, and now whichever of those drivers of disengagement were shaken, maybe all 4, can we move them into a role that better aligns to that job clarity, what they feel they're good at, what they want to be doing, fit with manager, the missing ingredient to a team that needs something new and different. Those are pieces we can address via a lateral move. And that is a fresh start, a new job. What they're probably looking for on LinkedIn jobs and Indeed, et cetera, they could find internally. And it's like retaining a client as opposed to going to have to go sell and acquire a new customer. It's just, it's a big win, and it's a win across the board. And I love what you're saying, and I hadn't looked at it that way till we chatted. That lateral move actually plugs a hole that you're probably struggling to plug that was created by a resignation. And now you're out there, and it's a battle. A lot of open jobs, a lot of people looking, regionally remote in the office, a lot of challenges. So if you can fill that gap and at the same time revitalize someone's career in your organization, what a win. I mean, what a win-win. And I feel like one hand isn't talking to the other right now. In a lot of organizations, we're looking externally to fill that gap or a new job as our company recovers, and we're worried that he or she are going to leave, and then they leave and we don't know what to do. We need to connect the dots. And I mean, there's some great opportunities to do so.
I think so. And, from that aspect of, you look at jobs where people are doing really, really well, they maybe been doing it for a while, and they maybe are looking for a change. And those people who really are good at building a process around it, right? So they've got their own way of doing it. It's repetitive, and it's a very smooth process, right? uninterrupted. This person gets their work done a majority of the time. Those are ideal candidates to look at internally and say, hey, look, we maybe have this other opening or gap.
If you look close enough, you can see it everywhere. The thing that moves the world. It's not a mental thing or an experience thing. It's a heart thing. The thing that makes Paylocity more than a technology company, but a people company. It's the source of our strength and the thing that sets us apart. For us, it's about care. It's being open to the outside world and knowing how it affects us inside. It's more than opening our hearts to others. It's engaging others in real ways. It can be simple things, sharing stories and laughing at jokes. It can also be really hard things, like changing the way we work and finding new ways to engage with each other. It's the way we act, the way we think. It's how we care every day. It's what we've always done. It's more than managing HR and payroll. It's about people. We're about evolving company cultures and moving toward a more connected workplace. That's why it's personal. That's why we care. It's how we'll move forward. Together. Paylocity. Forward together.
Are you open to like exploring that? Because we think you're aligned either from a behavior standpoint or from a team standpoint, a manager standpoint, these other things you're talking about. And it's a new way to re-engage them and bring them, into creating more value for the business and being a bigger part of it. Plus, because they've created that process already, it's a lot easier to slide somebody from the outside into that role. And there's a method already. There's a method of coaching as well. So I really, implore business owners to really look at that piece of it, because it's a very valuable piece that could yield big dividends in today's age. Going back to behavior versus skill set, you kind of touched on this briefly, and I know in the predictive index discussions we hit on this a lot, because predictive index, one of the main tenets is you hire based on behavior because skills can be taught. And I really want that to kind of settle into a lot of our listeners and viewers. And I'd like to get some of your personal experience. Could you talk to that a little bit as far as what you've seen, where you've seen it really succeed, maybe some examples?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was really the one takeaway that hit me hardest from the article, the HBR article that you're sharing around, I don't think they used this phrase, but it was the way my brain kind of rearticulated it, these evergreen work styles.
Yes.
And the concept that, jobs have changed so much in the year and a half because of external factors, that pace of change is not going to slow down. As the world changes, as labor changes, as technology continues to advance, you hire someone into a job, and if you're only looking at the job, that job is going to change, right? The job's kind of a speedboat; it's turning on a dime, whereas the organization is more of a cruise ship. It takes longer to shift that. So if you can find these evergreen work styles that align to the needs of the organization, maybe even more broadly than the needs of the job, you're more likely to retain and find a better fit for that person. To your point, Jared, even a lateral move fit as they continue their career with you, than you are just looking black and white at a job. So that concept, I'm calling it evergreen work styles. But for example, I think if you're bringing someone into an organization, there's always the idea of looking at where are the gaps. And Predictive Index is a great example. Highly innovative organization, highly results-oriented organization. But because of that culture, we don't tend to have as many folks focused on process, on taking a time out, on the people side, on precision and details, right? Because you can't have everything, right? There's always the antithesis. And for that speed, driving change and driving results, it can come at the cost of some process and precision. So as we bring in more folks with that process side, regardless of job fit, we know we're going to need that. We're going to need people who can do the project plan, point out risk, pump the brakes. And it can be tough to drive change in the workforce. There can be some tissue rejection, and you're bringing in people that sound great on paper, but are actually going to be creating that diversity that they talked about in the article, the diverse thought. Sure, at first, if we're all on the same page, we make quick decisions, but long-term, the product suffers because we don't have that diversity of thought, healthy disagreement, and where I lack an emphasis, that is your emphasis. And together, if we can make that work through our understanding of our work styles, it can be magical and not just friction. But you need that friction for the innovation per the article we're talking about. So I think it's really critical to identify some of those work styles, whether they be around problem solving, process, change, the people side, the metric side. Those things are very evergreen, and they can be applied to different roles, different teams. I think that's a point we have to take, and really digging into some sort of, again, back to, I'm always going to go to the assessment data, some sort of valid predictor of those behavioral styles, and understanding which behavioral styles are evergreen. That's key. And I think, and it really doesn't mean you deselect certain people and automatically select others. It just drives a really smart interview conversation. And I like the interview path and questions in the article, right? Around these are problem solving, whatever this concept is, it's very universal. So I think that's those evergreen work styles through assessment, through interview, can really get you where you need to be with this.
Absolutely. I'm sorry, I was looking away. I was looking at my notes from the article because, one of the key items I said in the beginning was, what do an admin assistant, exercise physiologist, and music composer all have in common, right? They're all top hires for software developers. Like diversity of what you're looking at, more behavioral, what's at the core of the person, what do they bring? Because, you look at those, and you and I look at these articles, same with Scott, we're looking at these articles as a, through the lens of predictive index of what we use in the past. So we kind of have some insights to say, hey, admin assistant, that person's going to be, maybe a little bit more detailed. They're going to be very maybe all-encompassing, thinking about everybody who's going to use it, right? Whereas an exercise physiologist is more on the action of it, or the music composer is looking at holistically how to bring this all together. And they bring those unique attributes to the software developer job, right? Another great example I like to cite is when I worked at Caterpillar in Lafayette, Indiana. I was there as an engineer right out of college doing large engine design. And predominantly in our area, most of the engineers hired had a background as a farmer. And that was by design. And because farmers, when you think about it, they're in the field, their tractor breaks down. What do they got to do? They got to be an engineer. They got to figure out how to fix it. So they were looking at work kind of experience and core behaviors that led to and kind of fed certain positions within the company. Exactly the stuff we're talking about, but you have very diverse thinking in that regard.
Absolutely. Whether it's, dependability and conscientiousness, or openness to experience and change, or interpersonal sensitivity in relationships. Of course, I'm going to go back to behavioral and personality theory because that's my training and my expertise. But you can link some of those, I would call biodata or biographical information factors you're talking about, past work experiences that may on an initial glance don't seem to make sense in relation to the job, but they certainly do. And when you look at, biodata questionnaires, it's interesting. Have you ever, worked in a grocery? Have you ever done this? And you're like, why are you asking me about that? Well, because it links to this concept. When I was doing some work about 10 years ago to create a hiring program for sales representatives, it happened to be for a client that does food service sales.
Okay.
So these individuals and I rode in the car with them. It was a lot of fun. They drive around their rural territories, and it's all private restaurants. Mm-hmm. So they go in there, and the ones that were most successful, they had two factors. One, of course, they were very consultative. Like they would sit down and say, that chicken marinade actually works really well with beef. Oh, I didn't think about that. So then they end up selling them the chicken marinade. And these are huge packages of food items for restaurants. The other thing that was interesting is sales folks who like to cook. If you were a cook and you had that mentality, you could talk about these food items, these ideas from a point of knowledge and experience and build rapport. So, a cook versus a sales rep, like the example of the software developer and the admin assistant, it makes no sense initially until you think about those evergreen capabilities that really transfer. Really interesting when you uncover some of these things and then it starts to make sense.
Right. Love that term, evergreen capabilities, and, that's something maybe a lot of people aren't aware of, but evergreen just means that it's kind of timeless, right? It's not tied to a time frame. In the future, it's going to be just as valuable as it is today. And you're going to be able to leverage those core competencies, and behaviors, to help further the business. And I think, more business owners taking that mindset, once again, an actionable item is think about that when you bring in a new hire, right? You're not just hiring for that job of the day, though you may feel pressured to. And a lot of times that's what happens. I got to fill this gap right now. It's super urgent that I plug this hole. So I'm going to hire specifically for this machine operator position. And if you do that, and let's say you hit the nail right on the head, you've got a machine operator, right? But 5-10 years from now, you probably still have a machine operator, which is fine if that's really what you're after from a longevity standpoint. But it's more that strategy of, do I want this person to grow with the business, grow with the company, or am I looking for that long-term stability where this person is going to be happy in that job or position for the long term, right?
Yeah, and I think it goes to the other aspect from the article, which was around organization fit. Talked a lot about help the candidates see themselves working in the company in the context, even beyond conventional, job experiences and skills. And I think we could call that Evergreen Values, right? Not just Evergreen Work Styles that could be transferable, used in different ways based on knowing what you need, which takes a very honest, future-oriented conversation, but Evergreen Values. And in that situation, it can be, because the jobs are going to change. So someone's job changes significantly, even away from their traditional skill track or career track. Mm-hmm. You can retain their engagement, their interest, and their passion because they believe in the mission.
Sure.
And certainly I've had that experience at my time at Predictive Index as a recent example, going from a hands-on management consultant, building consulting programs, doing the work with clients. I've fallen more into a product leadership role, as Jared, as you and I met, doing partner education. Right. If that was just a job on paper, I probably would have said, no, that doesn't fit me. But to align to the Predictive Index mission of talent optimization and what we're trying to do with that discipline, that taps into my values. So as I talk to candidates, speaking of hiring, as I talk to candidates for either my team or the department I work in, I tend to talk more about the mission than I talk about my job. Or even their job, because I know at the rate of change we have in our organization, their job's going to change in 6 months too. So it's more about their values, our mission, and if you can connect the person's passion and Evergreen Values to the mission of the company, and that org culture fit, that's, now you've got that universal adapter for internal job movement and hopefully long-term retention.
And that's the other piece I really want business owners to take away from this, is because I hear a lot of business owners talk about, we can't get top talent because we don't pay the wages that they're demanding. Wages always seems to be the bottleneck, but hey, we're trying to do incentives, we're trying to do bonuses, all this. And, I've done a lot of research with, different behavioral economists, right? And the studies always kind of come out the same, which is really interesting, is that money only goes so far. And actually money wears off pretty quick as far as that reward, because unless they're cashing that check, getting the money in hand, and they're holding on to that, day after day, it's kind of not front of mind. It's out of sight, out of mind, actually. And so these other methods of alignment or employee engagement are much more pertinent and relevant when you look at employee engagement and you look at employee retention. And so don't think because you're a business owner that because your wages aren't top of the line, you're not like, the company out in Seattle is paying every worker their $70,000 a year, though it's a great experiment. You're more in line with what industry standard is, or maybe you're a little low and you're trying to figure out ways to really bring in top talent, right? You need to look at employee engagement and alignment from that aspect.
Yeah, I think to your point, it's a factor, but it ends up being a hygiene factor. And I think a lot of companies are experiencing that now. Once they kind of steadied the ship financially, mm-hmm. and were able to provide either delayed merit pay increases, or I've seen even just surprise pay increases. Yeah. Hey, do you want some more money? Oh, okay, here's some more money. It's only going to go so far. Right. And it's not the true differentiator, certainly. And certainly for talented folks that have options, they're at a certain level, they're going to stay at that level. But tapping into their passions, and even something we didn't talk about with this concept of lateral moves, how can that become a career development opportunity?
Right.
This isn't something that you had in your mission, but imagine if you added it to your bag of tricks.
Right. There's value there. There's
Absolutely.
value.
because we're not going to keep them until the gold watch moment 40 years from now. But can we keep them a little longer and actually make them better and make us better through that process? I think that, this career portfolio concept I keep reading a lot about, in terms of, look, I'm looking at myself almost like an investment portfolio. I'm doing this for a little while. I'm acquiring this skill. I'm acquiring this in my brand. I'm moving on. I keep moving and moving. So you're not going to retain them forever, but if you can grow them, that's that, to your point, that's worth more than money.
Another thing too, coming from the article, like that HBR article provokes so many different thoughts, I think on both sides. But diversity, right? They talk about the diversity of thought, because typically we hire people like ourselves. We surround ourselves with people like ourselves because it's comfortable. And you get in that group think aspect, right? So by opening up in a more diverse hiring, right, bringing in people who aren't normally in those positions. And, for instance, there's a stereotype, in manufacturing industry, most engineers are white males, a little bit older. So bringing in new talent that maybe doesn't fit that mold, right? Bringing in, minorities in that type of role or position who are just as qualified, right? Or, different people from different backgrounds even to come in and offer a little bit different insight. Maybe people who kind of grew up with a background in a third world country, but have gotten an education equivalent. So they still have, the offering there to be an engineer, but they're coming from a different aspect of life. Because I think just you and I looking at it from the predictive index side, we're like, oh, that person can be a balancer in the team.
Yeah.
Offer different perspectives. There's extreme value in that.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of things come to mind with that. One is the just unconscious bias that we're all cursed with as humans. These heuristics, these kind of decision-making shortcuts that through our evolution, right, has served us well to survive, but can get in our way in terms of being fair and just, or even just making good decisions. So it's I had a former colleague at one point did a lot of research on, speaking of the Olympics, very topical concept, Olympic judges rating of athletes, and just how inconsistent it is, just given human judgment biases. So with that, even with all the science that someone like myself can put into a process, let's do a job analysis survey. Tell us what skills you need in this role. Oftentimes the results look like the rest of the company.
Sure.
Right. They people gravitate to these things. Well, that's a responsibility I like to take on. That's something that we value here. That's something that, just a part of what we do. Even the scientific job profiles coming out of the process can look like more of the same, or that like me scenario. So we really need to challenge people to think differently, think about what's missing, think about what you need a few years from now, not just what the status quo nature is. So that even with all the science in the world, that's a challenge. The other experience I've had recently happened to be with the Predictive Index tool, but we had these reference profiles. So you're a captain, you're an individualist, you're a promoter. Was talking with a African-American candidate, and he shared something with me that I hadn't seen, where he said, I love this. This gives me, this articulates my identity in terms of my work styles. And yeah, these are the things I bring to the table. And yep, those are the things I don't want to do. And those are the things I'm good at. Those are the things I don't care to, it's pretty robust. But his perspective was, this is kind of a colorblind, objective profile on who I am. I'm not a Black software engineer candidate. I'm a captain, or he wasn't a captain, I can't recall now. But he tapped into it that way, which I had never thought of. And we had a really interesting conversation based on that. So I think that's certainly, again, from my psychometric perspective, it's another way to use this data to understand some of those capabilities. Because even in things like interviews, it can be very hard. I've talked to organizations about inclusive interview processes where they have a good interview question and it taps into the behavior, but it asks about an experience that certain historically disadvantaged groups may have never had that experience.
Sure.
So therefore, it's not a fair question, even though it's a valid question. So there's a lot going on right now on how we can make these processes and inputs more inclusive and more powerful.
I love that whole, trying to think through the lens of these tools help us, become more colorblind, be more inclusive. That is something, we've kind of talked about a little bit in the past, but not really like emphasized. And I think there's extreme value in that. Back to diverse backgrounds provide more diverse solutions, right? things of that nature. And diverse backgrounds create better teams because you've got a lot more input from various angles. So those are all very extreme and very relevant conversations in today's world, right? As we look to build more inclusivity in this, and really fits well with that article. Coming up on time here, Adam. So I just wanted to ask you, looking at hiring and looking at the current landscape that we're dealing with and the challenges with business owners today, how can people reach you? Do you have any thoughts or any kind of maybe some tidbits for business owners on how to deal with this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the key takeaways is kind of this, pay me now or pay me later mentality, right? If we just focus on the singular job fit, right, as you were saying, if we just say machine operator, right, it's really short term, and in the dynamic nature of the world we live in, it's not going to be enough. We have to look at that bigger picture. And I think it can work both ways. If we're triangulating on multiple areas, understanding not just how does this person fit with the job behaviors, but with how they need to prop up the manager's lack of versatility, right? How can we make that a dynamic duo? How do they, as you said, become a team balancer? So you have a team that already has a lot of homogeneous work styles. How do we bring in someone more heterogeneous? And that it doesn't have to be, we're not just talking demographics here, we're talking work styles and perspectives. A very risk-oriented group that's always pushing the frontier, they need someone to lasso them, dig their heels in and say, okay, wait a minute, let's win. How much? Who? Let's just pump the brakes a little bit. And those can be, friction-filled conversations, but can also be magical when they do balance each other. So that diversity of thought, diversity of experience, diversity of work style. And I think that's the key. We've got to look at that. We've got to look at org fit to get people's values to connect to the passion and mission of the organization, so you can have that long-term high performer who is going to move into different roles, or going to have to navigate lack of role clarity or role change as things happen. So I think at that, we've got to look at it long-term. We've got to have some real conversations. And to avoid paying later, I think it is about more of those evergreen work styles, those evergreen values. And if you can determine what that looks like, put some data on top of those two concepts, then I think you can perform some unconventional hiring at scale, programmatically, and really in a powerful manner. So and in terms of getting in contact with me, as you said, my current role is Director of Professional Services at Predictive Index. So you can always find me on LinkedIn in terms of what I'm currently doing there. But even topics beyond that around workforce culture and candidate hiring, leadership development. I'm just a nut and a nerd about these topics and enjoy talking about them. So Jared, I appreciate you bringing this flavor to it around this article that I had not seen prior to us chatting, and this idea of unconventional hiring, because I really think it connects the dots of the Great Resignation and how do we fill these empty roles or these new roles as we become more prosperous as an organization, get it back on our feet, and then how do we retain this talent that a year and a half ago, these were our diamonds, these were our gems, and now we're actually walking out the door. So as a manager, as a business owner, it's scary and it hurts. But I think there are some good best practices we can do to stem the tide a bit and make this better.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate your time. I appreciate you, Adam, and what you and the Predictive Index team bring to the table for business owners. I really encourage viewers, listeners to reach out to Adam. You can reach out to myself as well. I'll put all that at the end of the podcast so that you guys can access. I'll also put a link to the article that we're talking about from Harvard Business Review on unconventional talent and unconventional hiring. I really encourage people to really think about this as more a strategic item, right? And start internally. Stop the bleeding, stop the exodus. Really think about how you're engaging your employees, and then start looking at the outside hiring process and look at who you're bringing in. Really look at how you create a more diverse and inclusive organization and bring in these different perspectives, because there's huge value here to be tapped. So thanks again, Adam. Really hope you have a great rest of your day, and we will definitely be talking more in the future.
Thanks, Jared. This was great.
If you want to recommend somebody to appear on the podcast as a guest, please email us at info@opsqc.com. If you're interested in sponsoring a podcast, please reach out to us at the same email. We'd love to have your support.